Hello everyone, what is up? Welcome back to another episode of Killer Instinct, you guys. Thank you so much for joining me here today. If you're new here, hi, my name is Savannah and I am your host of Killer Instinct. And before we get started, make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button. That way you never miss an episode. We post weekly here on the podcast every single Wednesday. You are not going to want to miss it. We also upload the video version onto YouTube on Wednesdays as well. So make sure you are subscribed. And if you're looking for more exclusive Killer Instinct content, you can always find that over on our Patreon, where we post an additional 3 episodes a month, 3 full-length exclusive episodes go over on Patreon a month, and we also have a monthly exclusive live stream as well. You can find all of those links in the description box below, and you can go check those out if you have not already. But with that being said, you guys, let's get into why we are here today. As you can tell by the title of today's episode, today we are talking about the brutal, senseless, and horrific murder of a man named Kevin Bacon. Kevin's murder took place in December of 2019. Many of you might be familiar with this case, as it is one that definitely got the media's attention when it first took place. So let's jump right on into it today. Kevin Bacon was born on November 28th, 1994 to his parents, Carl and Pam Bacon. He grew up alongside his sister Jennifer, who was 1 year older than Kevin. Jennifer has memories of Kevin and her playing together. They were rarely ever apart as children up until Jennifer had to enroll in school. Kevin's family was very close, and from a young age, his parents instilled the value of hard work, and they really wanted to teach Jennifer and Kevin the importance of earning what they got in life, so they would become dedicated, motivated, hard workers in the future. Kevin had a lot of extended family that he was also very close with outside of just his immediate family. He had different cousins, aunts, uncles, and his grandparents that all meant the world to Kevin. Now, growing up, Kevin had many different hobbies and interests. He loved everything from Barbie dolls to tractors to Britney Spears. And it was during middle school that Kevin came out as gay to his family. And while this was a shock for his family, they were very, very accepting and supportive of Kevin. Now, it was while in middle school that Kevin also developed another passion, which was being in the marching band. Kevin absolutely loved the marching band. He played from middle school all the way up to his senior year of high school, and throughout that time he experimented with multiple different instruments like the baritone, the tuba, and the trumpet. Marching band also is what bled into Kevin's love for music. He loved all sorts of genres of music, and he was very passionate about that. And another one of Kevin's passions was beauty and hairstyling. Kevin's love for doing hair came from playing with Barbie dolls growing up, and over time Kevin went from playing with his Barbie's hair to then evolving into doing his family members' hair, practicing different styles on them, and then he went on to attend the Sharp Hair Academy and then went on to work as a hairstylist in Flint, Michigan, while also attending the University of Michigan at Flint. So that gives you a little bit of a background on Kevin, and that is what leads us to where this case begins, which is Christmas Day of 2019. This was when Kevin was only 25 years old, and on Christmas Day of 2019, Kevin was expected to go over to his parents' house to celebrate the holiday with them. However, when Kevin never showed up to this celebration, his family grew very concerned. Kevin was not the type of person to just not show up to a family function, let alone miss such a significant holiday that he loved, especially without communicating beforehand. Kevin was always on his phone. So if he was going to be late, if he wasn't going to show up, he was going to call, he was going to text, he was going to make them aware beforehand. But that wasn't the case on Christmas Day 2019. From Kevin's family's understanding, the previous night on Christmas Eve, Kevin had spent the night with some friends having a game night, and his Ring camera footage at his apartment showed Kevin leaving his apartment on Christmas Eve. However, it never showed him returning. Now, because no one was able to get in contact with Kevin and no one knew where he was or what happened to him, that is when Kevin's family decided to reach out to the authorities and report Kevin as a missing person. Now, while they were doing that, Kevin's family was simultaneously driving around the area trying to search for Kevin themselves. They went to Swartz Creek, which is a city in Michigan, and to their surprise, they actually did discover Kevin's car abandoned in a parking lot near a Rite Aid store. Now, seeing his abandoned car only deepened his family's worry because they searched the surrounding shops, they looked in the Rite Aid, all the shops surrounding it, but there was no sign of Kevin, and his family knew that Kevin would not willingly leave his car behind. Now, the following day, on December 26th, police did accompany Kevin's family to his car, and when they opened up Kevin's vehicle, they discovered Kevin's phone and his wallet. They also found a bag of clothing. It was a bag full of Kevin's clothes, and it definitely seemed suspicious to authorities. Now, when doing the forensic analysis on Kevin's phone, police were able to see that Kevin had been actively using the app Grindr. If you're unaware, Grindr is an LGBTQ dating app that Kevin was actively using along with its millions of other users. Now, Kevin specifically, when they went through his phone and noticed Grindr, they started going through his messages on Grindr, and that is when police came across Kevin's messages with another man named Mark Latunsky. Now, police saw that Mark and Kevin had been messaging back and forth on Christmas Eve and had plans to meet up together that evening. So it appeared to authorities that Kevin telling his family that he was going to have a game night with some friends was really just a cover-up for him going and meeting another man off of a dating app. And through these messages, police were confident that Kevin's last interactions may be linked to Mark because in the messages, Mark says to Kevin, "Pick a place in Swartz Creek. How about the strip mall on the west side of town?" And then later, lo and behold, Kevin's car then goes on to be found in that same shopping center. So police are starting to put the pieces together a little bit here of what they believe happened here, and they are growing more and more suspicious. It was also clear to police based off of the interactions that Mark and Kevin were having over their messages on Grindr that they were both expecting to engage in a sexual encounter. They weren't going on a date. This wasn't, something of that sort. This definitely seemed like a one-night fling hookup scenario. And one of the messages that Kevin sent to Mark specifically that stood out to authorities was, "Now just one question. You're going to keep me safe, right?" And Mark responded with, "You will see that I am concerned about your safety." Now, based off of these messages, police knew without a doubt they needed to speak with Mark. They believed that whatever happened to Kevin, Mark probably had some sort of knowledge about. Now, on December 28th, 2019, police decided to pay Mark Latunsky a visit. They arrived at his home where he lived at alone. Police knocked on the door, Mark opened it, and police explained that they were investigating the disappearance of Kevin Bacon. Now, according to police, Mark very willingly let them come inside, and police said that Mark's demeanor seemed very cool, calm, and collected. He allowed police to search the entire home. Police initially went upstairs of the home and then went into the basement. Now, it was when police went into that basement that they discovered a shocking and horrifying scene. In the basement of Mark Latunsky's home, there was a sliding barn door with a lock on the outside of that door. Now, when police slid open that barn door, that is when they discovered Kevin Bacon's body propelled to the ceiling, hanging upside down from chains in the basement. By the time authorities found Kevin, he was completely undressed, there was blood everywhere, and Kevin was already dead. Now, Mark was immediately arrested by authorities and he was placed in the back of the police car. And shockingly for authorities, they were very taken aback by Mark's demeanor. Again, it seemed very nonchalant from the way that Mark allowed police to just willingly walk through his home, knowing that Kevin Bacon was downstairs dead in his basement. Mark was not coming across as someone who was concerned, worried, antsy, trying to hide anything. If anything, it seemed to be the opposite. When Mark was arrested, he did tell authorities that they were making a mistake. However, he then went on to ask them when he was in the back of the police car how he would be getting back home after his interview with the detectives. So it didn't seem to be clicking for Mark in that moment. For police, they were starting to pick up on the fact that Mark wasn't fully understanding the scope and the scale and the severity of what was happening here. Other odd comments that Mark made to authorities was he claimed that he was actually not Mark Latunsky, but that his real name was Edgar Thomas Hill. Now, before we move forward in this case at all, before we get any further, I want to take a second and talk about who really is Mark Latunsky. Now, Mark had a relatively conventional upbringing. He was incredibly smart. He was a valedictorian of his high school class and then went on to attend Central Michigan University to complete his undergraduate. And after that, he went on to attend Iowa State University to complete his master's degree. Now, afterwards, he then moved back to Michigan, where he got a job at a chemical company working as a manager. So he worked in a managerial role at this chemical company. Now, in 2001, Mark did get married. He married a woman named Emily. The two were set up on a blind date by mutual friends, and their relationship really blossomed from there. After a year of dating, the two got married in August of 2001, like I mentioned, and Emily worked as a preschool assistant teacher. Now, Emily said that she was drawn to Mark because of his kind heart. He had compassion for people, and he was very much so a family man. It seemed like all of her dreams of growing up, getting married, having a family, and really living that picket fence ideal life were coming true. Now, Emily said that her and Mark had a relatively good marriage. They didn't argue. They bought a home together. It was a fixer-upper, and they repaired it together. All of the renovations, all of those little repairs, they did it as a team. Emily and Mark had a total of 4 children together. They had a son and 3 daughters, and their children described their upbringing as normal and traditional and nothing out of the ordinary. However, according to Emily, she stated that in 2010, the year 2010, this is when she began to worry about Mark. She started having some growing concern regarding Mark. She found a naked picture of a man saved onto Mark's computer, and when she asked Mark about it, Mark said that he simply had the picture because he was using it as a way to compare his own body to someone else's to make sure that Emily was happy with him and his physique and the way that he looked. Now, Emily said that she was a little taken aback by this. She was a little confused, didn't understand why Mark would feel the need to compare himself, but she decided to just accept his explanation and move forward. However, that same year, Mark began showing some more signs of mental health struggles. Emily said that he kept referring to this trust fund that he had never spoken about before. Mark also told Emily that he did not believe that he was his mother's son and that he believed that he was his mother's brother instead. He told her things like his real name wasn't Mark Latunsky and it was just a cover for his real identity. And again, he was really just focusing on things that were not making a lot of logical sense. And because of Emily's concern, Emily had asked Mark to admit himself into a mental health facility where he stayed for 5 days. And afterwards, Mark was sent home and given medication, which he did not take for very long. And after he stopped taking it, he told Emily that he didn't need it because there was nothing wrong with him. Now, it was at this time that Mark also told Emily something that would changed the course of their relationship forever. Mark told Emily that he had not been faithful to her or in their marriage, and that while he would be on business trips, he would engage in different affairs with men. Now, as you can imagine, this was devastating for Emily to hear that her husband was not loyal to her on multiple different occasions, but still, she was committed to making her marriage work. She was committed to making this family that she had created strong and stay together. So the two of them decided to go to marriage counseling together. And during that time, Mark and Emily committed to giving their marriage a year to repair. They gave themselves a year. However, very quickly, Mark started regressing and slipping back into his old behavior. The cheating and the lies, they only continued. And because of that, Emily filed for divorce from Mark in March of 2012. Now, in 2015, so 3 years after the divorce, Mark got remarried, and this time he remarried a man, and this man was named Jamie. Jamie described Mark as a loving husband. He claimed that their relationship was very healthy. However, Jamie could tell that he was distancing himself, that Mark was distancing himself from his previous life, so to speak, from his children, from his ex-wife. Mark was paying child support, but that was the extent of the communication that there was. That was the extent of the communication, not just between Mark and Emily, but between Mark and his children. However, that changed in the year of 2018 when Mark reached out to Emily and asked to start seeing his children again. Now, Emily did agree to this and allowed Mark to see the kids. However, this lasted only about a year, up until February of 2019, when Mark had lost his job, which only further ignited his mental struggles and caused them to rise to the surface again. And this time, Mark was saying things like he was adamant that his children were not his and stopped seeing them altogether. Now, Jamie also ended his marriage with Mark around this time. He ended up leaving Mark in September of 2019. And at this point, Jamie claimed that there were just many cracks within the marriage. Mark was exhibiting signs of paranoia, stating that people were coming after him. And Jamie also explained that Mark was cheating on Jamie. Jamie found Mark in different sexual chat rooms and caught Mark having affairs with different men that he would meet online. So Jamie was also done and he left Mark. Now, by late 2019, Mark was living by himself and he was selling himself online to other men, trading sexual acts for money. And as we know, late 2019, that is when Kevin Bacon was murdered. Now, when authorities looked into some other suspicious behavior revolving around Mark Latunsky, they discovered that on October 10th of 2019, there was a man named James Carlson who called 911 to report that he was being held captive in Mark Latunsky's basement. He claimed that he was able to cut himself free from being chained up with a butcher knife. However, when police arrived to Mark's home, James claimed that everything was consensual and he decided not to press charges against Mark. Now, 1 month later, in November of 2019, a very similar incident took place where a man escaped Mark's basement yet again, ran to a neighbor's home screaming, "Help me, help me." 911 was called, and when police arrived, this man decided that he too did not want to press any charges and that everything was consensual. So there were some conflicting stories going on, some suspicious behavior seemingly coming from Mark's house. However, no one was ever pressing charges against him. So now let's get back to the investigation, because police brought Mark down to the station after they arrested him for questioning. And when Mark sat down with authorities, he was still trying to convince them that he was not Mark Latunsky and that his name was Edgar Thomas Hill. Mark claimed that he was the last one in his lineage and that growing up as a child, everyone knew that he was not Mark Latunsky, but no one felt the need to tell him. So it was this secret that Mark was claiming that everyone was keeping from him. Now, alongside that, Mark said that even though his name was Edgar Thomas Hill, he went by another name, which was Olikos. Now, for police, this was definitely showing them that Mark was severely struggling with connecting to reality and he was struggling mentally. But despite that, that, Mark was still talking. He had not requested a lawyer, nothing of the sort. And so police were using this to their advantage, and they were really trying their best to level with Mark or make Mark believe that they were leveling with them to try and continue this conversation. And Mark ended up slowly but surely opening up about Kevin's murder. And this is when Mark told police something that they were very much not expecting. However, when it pertained to Kevin's murder, Mark confessed that he did murder Kevin, but he claimed it was not murder. He claimed that Kevin himself had asked Mark to kill him and to make him disappear. Mark claimed that this was not murder, but instead, this was an assisted suicide. Now, Mark went on to say that he had met Kevin for the first time on Christmas Eve in the parking lot of Swartz Creek. He explained that they met on Grindr, and he also explained that Kevin had a kidnapping fantasy and that Kevin wanted Mark to go to Walmart and purchase clothing that Kevin would wear in this encounter, which is why police found Kevin's clothes in his own car, a bag of his clothes in his car. Mark claimed that when he saw Kevin, Kevin changed into the clothes that Mark had bought for him. He had on handcuffs, earmuffs, and a blindfold, and he explained that Kevin willingly got into the back of Mark's car and that Mark was up front driving. Mark explained that he then drove them both back to Mark's home and the two went into the basement. Mark stated that him and Kevin did engage in a consensual sexual encounter. However, afterwards is when he and Kevin discussed of the ways in which Mark could kill Kevin and make him disappear. Now, Mark said that Kevin had asked him to get a knife or a sword and slit his throat. That is the way that Kevin wanted to die. But Mark said that felt wrong, that felt unjust, and it was morally hard for him to do. However, despite his hesitation, Mark claimed that he did what Kevin wanted him to do. Mark went upstairs, got a knife, went back down into the basement, and began stabbing Kevin, plunging the knife into his spine. Now, Mark told authorities where they could even find the knife in his home. He claimed that it was in the dresser of his upstairs bedroom, and police did go to that location. They discovered the knife and that it had dried blood on it, and that blood was in fact Kevin's. But that was not all, because authorities were about to hear something that would take Kevin's murder to a new extreme. And even when they did not think it was possible in this case, Mark was about to shock them. Mark claimed that after murdering Kevin, that is when he hung Kevin upside down from the ceiling. So, just to be clear, Mark is stating that the murder itself took place while Kevin was lying down. And again, from Mark's description, Kevin was just waiting to be killed. Now, afterwards is when Mark said he hung Kevin's body upside down. He then took the knife, cut off Kevin's genitals, took them upstairs, cooked them on the griddle, and ate them. Now, Mark said that this was something that he and Kevin had discussed beforehand, something that Kevin was supportive of and encouraged Mark to do. Mark actually said that prior to Kevin's murder, he himself had purchased a food dehydrator and was planning on taking more of Kevin's body parts to put them into the dehydrator and store them for later consumption. Mark said that the process of this consumption was actually fairly simple, and he compared it to eating Rocky Mountain oysters. Now, despite Mark's explanation as to what he says happened, which is that he just did what Kevin asked him to do and he just did what Kevin wanted, authorities have been very adamant and clear from the very beginning that they do not believe that Kevin wanted to die. They do not believe this in the slightest. They don't believe that Mark was just fulfilling Kevin's wishes. They believe that Mark planned a cold-blooded, calculated, cannibalistic murder. Now, this goes back to the messages that Kevin sent Mark, asking Mark if Mark would keep him safe in their encounter together. Kevin gave no indication to his family, his friends, or any of the messages that he sent that he wanted to die or end his life. Police theorized, based off of the evidence that they obtained after arriving to Mark's home, that Kevin and Mark engaged in a sexual encounter that resulted in Mark then stabbing Kevin in the back of the neck and slitting his throat. Afterwards, they believe that Mark propelled Kevin upside down before mutilating Kevin and consuming his genitals. There are others that believe that Kevin was already hanging upside down and he was in a way helpless because he was restrained. Downstairs in this basement area of Mark's home, there was a lot of BDSM equipment, a lot of bondage, chains, things of that nature where Kevin himself would have been restrained. Mark even stated that when Kevin was in the back seat of his car, he was in handcuffs, so he was restrained from the very beginning. So with all of this, Mark was charged with the murder of Kevin Bacon. Now, Mark did not disagree. He did not deny that he murdered Kevin, and because of that, he ultimately pled guilty to the homicide in September of 2020, and then in December of 2022, he was finally charged with life in prison without the possibility of parole and an additional 111 months for the mutilation of Kevin's body. Now, there is not believed to be any specific motive associated with Kevin's murder. This does seem like it was an opportunistic killing from Mark's standpoint. Again, this was the first time that Kevin and Mark had met each other. It was their first encounter together. And while police do believe as well that Kevin was Mark's first victim, they do not believe that he would have been his last. And that, you guys, is the case of Kevin Bacon. I'm so curious to hear your thoughts, what you think. Please let me know in the comments below. But with that being said, you guys, that is going to be all for me today. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode here of Killer Instinct. Again, before you go, make sure you hit that subscribe button wherever you're watching. That way you never miss an episode. We post weekly here on the podcast every single Wednesday. You're not going to want to miss it. We additionally upload the video version onto YouTube on Wednesdays as well. And again, like I mentioned in the beginning, all Patreon links can be found in the description box below, and you can go over and check those out. I will be back next week with a brand new case for you guys, and until then, stay safe. Bye, guys.